Good morning, everybody. My name is Joachim Fischer, and I hold a Jean Monnet Chair in European Cultural Studies here at the University of Limerick. Welcome, everybody here in the room and also online. I hear there are quite a few participants online. Yes, I hold a Jean Monnet Chair, and many here, and maybe listening as well, will be familiar with the Jean Monnet program. The Jean Monnet program is financed by the European Union as part of Erasmus, and its purpose is to foster and encourage the study of the European Union and European studies generally in third-level education. I hold the fourth chair in European Studies here at the university, and it's the first one with a cultural remit. I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. So I'm delighted to speak here as part of the Research Week, and I'm particularly grateful to Christine Brennan, who suggested it to me. It seems to me that this is very appropriate in a number of ways. One is that this year the University of Limerick will be 50 years. It started in 1972. And the first program that the university offered in Arts and Humanities, in fact the only program it offered, was European Studies. So in that sense, European Studies is intimately linked with the University of Limerick and its predecessor, the National Institute of Higher Education. It was the new institution in '72 was actually opened by the president of the College of Europe in Bruges, Hendrik Broekman, with a speech of Europe in education. So that's one of the aspects, the reasons, and of course there is a bigger reason. Not only did the university start with European studies, Ireland itself joined the European Union on the 1st of January 1973, and the University of Limerick and its predecessor was really part of this movement into a new Europe, into a new future. So the purpose of this session is to remind us of this, and also to showcase European Studies. The course, the BA in European Studies, is still running. By now, it's probably the longest running degree program of its kind in the world. 50 years as well, as I said. This year, I haven't heard of anyone that has been running for longer. I might also mention that one of our newest programs is also in European Studies, a pioneering double degree master's program in European Studies in cooperation with the Europa-Universität Flensburg in Germany. So the topic of our session here also suggested itself because of the currently running conference on the future of Europe. This also had an impact on the speaker that I invited, the external speaker, Deirdre Clune. I'll introduce her in a minute, because she has been involved in the conference on the future of Europe in Brussels from the beginning. The idea came from President Macron, who has been re-elected recently. It is strongly encouraging citizens' involvement in the debate about the future of Europe. So Deirdre will later be talking a little bit more about that. She is, of course, as most of you will know as well, our local MEP as well, the MEP for Ireland South. One bit of disappointment I have for you, unfortunately, is that our second MEP, Viola von Kramon-Taubadel, unfortunately cannot be with us, and this is due to technical reasons, which I was only informed about this morning, so I had no way of finding a replacement. Viola is at a party meeting in the countryside in France, and it transpires that the internet connection is just not good enough. So she's not able to come. The reason I might say that as well, the reason why I invited her in particular was I had listened to a very interesting interview with Viola on RTE Radio 1 on the European Union policy on the Ukraine conflict, and I thought this is a necessary aspect of our discussion, so I was very keen to invite her, and initially she had agreed, and it was all looking good, but unfortunately it's not going to happen. Nevertheless, the Ukraine will surface, and I have apart from our MEP in Brussels, Deirdre Clune, I have also invited local experts here who may or may not address this issue in more detail. I have Bernadette Andreosso O'Callaghan here to my left, and she is also a Jean Monnet, she has a personal Jean Monnet chair and is professor of economics here. Then I have Michael Kelly, head of French and senior lecturer in French, who will bring a cultural perspective on the future of Europe. And lastly, I have Professor Jan Plumper, our newly arrived professor of history, who, as luck would have it, has a special interest in European history and in the history of migration, so he will bring that dimension to the discussion. Because Viola is not here, we have a bit of time, so but overall I will stick to the structure that I had intended. We'll go to Deirdre first, and then I'll invite comments from the audience present, and also from anybody out there. This is a hybrid session, and I'm really glad to hear that there are so many participating online as well. Perhaps one other aspect that I should mention. It has always been my intention, and anybody in my department, the European Studies, the degree programs of European Studies, are currently located in the Department of Modern Languages and Applied Linguistics, to broaden out the debate and move beyond the mere political. The European studies, European Union studies are often confining themselves to the structures that we find in Brussels and what goes on in Brussels. I think, and Deirdre, I'm sure, will make that point again, in a way, it's far more important to go outside Brussels and involve citizens. This is the Conference for the Future of Europe is trying to do that, but to take a broader perspective of Europe and what we want Europe to do, and what our own involvement and engagement with this political project is. So in that sense, all of us have a responsibility that Europe continues and develops, and it's now being challenged specifically in Ukraine, as you will know, and it's not just an issue for politicians. Lastly, because this is a part of Research Week, I should also say that UL has a long record of research output in European Union studies and in European studies in a broader sense. And once again, our three speakers here are very much part of this aspect. Okay, so without further ado, I'll go over to Deirdre. I welcome Deirdre Clune to this meeting. And Deirdre, many of you will know, she is a member of NUGAL and consequently a member of the European People's Party in the European Parliament for Ireland South, and she is also a member of the Committee on Internal Market and Consumer Protections and Protection, and lastly, she is one of the two Irish representatives on the committee that deals with the conference on the future of Europe. So she is highly competent to speak here in this particular session, and I'm delighted that she has agreed to participate.
Okay, well, can you hear me? Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to be with you to give my input to the conference and when it started and where it's at now. And looking forward to the discussion afterwards to hear how we can improve, maybe, or where people see Europe as it is today. And it's changed, I must say, since the 28th of February, and I would also, or essentially 24th of February, and I'd also say that the impetus in the conference has changed as well, and probably the focus of some of the elements that citizens are talking about now has changed since the 24th of February. But you're right, the conference is about trying to engage with citizens directly, to reach out, to move away from the Brussels bubble where I'm sitting right now. But unfortunately, I think when you're dealing with 27 member states and different nationalities, different backgrounds, different cultures, different stages of economic development, well then, I mean, you do need some structures to be put in place to try and organise that. But it's really important to reach out to the citizens. And as you say, this is the first of its kind, the Conference of the Future of Europe. It's modelled and has been quoted extensively. It's modelled on the Irish Citizens' Assembly structure, whereby citizens were chosen randomly. Well, don't mean by randomly, but there was a scientific approach to it, and given then a topic to discuss. And I think we had some very positive outcomes from our own Citizens' Assembly. When I think of the referenda, that they resulted in referenda on marriage equality or repealing the 8th Amendment. I think the approach of Citizens' Assembly, then bringing it to our Oireachtas, and then to government, and then a government bringing a referendum to the people, was it was transparent, but it was also, it gave confidence to the system that there was an appetite amongst the people to deal with such questions. So I think from that point of view, the conference is being quoted as being similar to the Irish Citizens' Assembly. It's chosen this 800 citizens, chosen on a scientific basis by a market research company, chosen from across Europe, across gender, obviously nationality, 30% weighting for youth, which is really important because it is their future. But so from that point of view, it's trying to be as moving away as possible, I would say, from political speak, from political representatives, and getting to the people directly. And as you know, probably, maybe I'm speaking to people who know already, but it's composed of, yes, there's 800 citizens, four different divided into 4 different groupings. But there's also a multilingual platform that has been in operation, well, since the conference started officially last May, or almost 12 months now. That platform has closed since February, but that also was open to individuals or groups or whatever, people to set up their own discussion, their own event. Even a few people sit around their own kitchen table and just give a comment, a couple of sentences, just to really break it down, not to have anybody intimidated by any type of formal structure, which can be off-putting for people, but they may have something to say, or they may just want to also listen in, or just to what is being said, or to read other submissions and have a comment on that. So really it was as broad an approach as possible to people to have their say on various topics, or a topic of their choice, and not necessarily a decided topic. So from that point of view, that was the approach, started last May, and now we're into the process whereby the citizens panels have met. They finalised their proposals, and they're before the conference plenary now. And I'm a member of the conference plenary. There's over 400 members there, representatives of the citizens panel as well, also representatives of the European Parliament, ministers from every country, 3 commissioners, and also civil society representatives, like the employer representatives, economic and social representatives, youth organisation representatives as well. So it's broad as possible an approach, but really the themes and the proposals have to come directly from the multilingual platform and the citizens panels themselves, so that to ensure that they're, well, for want of a better word, authentic, not influenced by politicians, which has been very hard, I would say, from being a participant in that, in the working groups, to listen, to participate, and it's been really informative. I would say, it's a learning process. I see some commentary now already on maybe the citizens, what the citizens were asked to look at were very broad subjects like stronger economy or climate change or democracy. It might have been better if there was shorter or more precise topics, such as we had with our Citizens Assembly in Ireland. There wasn't enough time, maybe, or one other criticism was the citizens didn't have enough understanding of the institutions. But I wouldn't call that a criticism. I think criticism. I think, rather than being bogged down with the institutions and the structures and all that was in place, it was better to go there directly and hear what they had to say on the individual topics. So we've had a number of, since last June, I would say every 6 weeks, 1 or 2 were, one was postponed for COVID. We've had plenaries in Strasbourg for the weekend. Everybody gathers and discusses the outcome of the citizens panels. I would say some of the outcomes, some of the suggestions are already in place, but that's fine. And I wouldn't think that this is about getting any new ideas, not necessarily. Well, new ideas are welcome, even if it means treaty change. Nothing is off the table. But there's also the opportunity for the citizens to reinforce what's happening. That's good too, if you have a conversation around issues such as climate change, for instance. That has been a very positive one, but there an opportunity to share what's already happening in that area. Well, that's a good thing. If we don't necessarily want change all the time. I think one of the strong themes that comes up is that not enough is known about the institutions. One of the criticisms was, when you look at, you have the Council of Europe, and then you have the Council, and you have the Commission, and you have the Parliament, and you have the Committee of the Regions, and where does all that fit in? So, I'd say that there will be some very positive outcomes from this. We're preparing. We've had, as I say, a number of sessions looking at the input from the citizens panels, and now we're moving on to hopefully this weekend will be our final weekend, 29th and 30th of April in in Strasbourg, whereby the full conference plenary would come together, prepare their final report, and pass it to the presidents for their final deliberations, and we'll see what comes out of that. But I would say, from being involved in it myself directly, at the beginning there was a bit of frustration from everybody's part because they didn't know, it wasn't very clear what role people had. But I think we settled down quite quickly and just focused on the what the citizens came up with, and how we could, we as politicians or members of national parliament and European Parliament, there give our input into it, and try to hold back, if you like, from amend, but contribute in a meaningful way to the discussions. So citizens are very enthusiastic about it. It's an opportunity to have their say, and to have a say on the future of where we're going with Europe. And I just give you a kind of a broad, maybe I looked at some of the outcomes from the citizens and what they recommended under the various themes that we have to look at. One was democracy, European democracy, and absolutely there's a strong emphasis here to have more citizens participation and youth involvement in democracy, and not just at election time. I suppose I come from a country that we're directly elected in Ireland, directly elected, even though I would think that our turnout at European elections isn't great. If they weren't linked to the local elections, I don't think we'd have such a strong turnout. So really, what I want to get out of the conference, me personally, I would think, is to try and improve or to bridge that democratic deficit that we talk about, and have more involvement from citizens. So some of the proposals are, they want more citizens engagement, more participation mechanisms. Maybe it'll come from an extension of this type of consultation process, particularly more assemblies on big EU laws, is what they've said. Big EU laws, but major. I would put climate change as one of those big EU laws, and a youth check for legislation and what that means, on the impact it'll have on young people. EU-wide referenda, if we can do that on significant issues of importance, and move towards transnational lists if that comes from the citizens' assemblies. Now, I've just come from my own group in the EPP here in the Parliament. We're having a discussion because there's a proposal next week on transnational lists, and I think most small countries, including Ireland, would be opposed to that. So there again, you have a dilemma now, because it would mean that the figures show that if there was to be a series of MEPs elected on a transnational basis, that wouldn't suit the smaller countries. So already you have different opinions there, and more of a say for the Commission and election of for the Commission, and to be whenever in the Parliament, in the European Parliament elections, and we've seen that in the Spitzencandidate process that didn't work last time. So how are we going to bridge that deficit and encourage more participation in European elections? I think some of the positive contributions we've had from the citizens panels will help us towards that. And they want to be all European Parliament and Council meetings televised. So there's some very practical proposals, and then some very more serious ones. But I think I would hope, as I say myself, that they'll be very. That'll be one of the strong recommendations that comes from the work of the conference. It's to try and encourage more citizens' participation and engagement, and maybe not just on politics in general, but on themes or significant pieces of legislation or proposals. So values, values, rights, and rule of law was also discussed. And when the citizens were considering their proposals, they were there was the Commission at the time was looking at Poland and Hungary and looking to withhold funding from them based on breaches of rule of law, and that has evolved since. But it's one of the strong recommendations from the citizens as well that would happen. They wanted more awareness around the whole about rule of law and what that means, and support for media and an independent media. So I think, and I think when we look at what's going to happen in the end, you'll see that a lot of these proposals, maybe they're already in place, which is a good thing, or there are proposals to bring them, which is very important because it means you have the confidence of the citizens. Economy, social justice and jobs, which was probably a very broad theme, was, I would think, considered, wanted fairness, local production, flexible wage retirement, ensure the companies pay taxes where profits are made, which I think we've advanced as well on all that area. On migration, it was interesting to see that there was a focus on legal migration and ensuring entry for legal migrants and that a greater sharing across member states of asylum seekers and support for those that are in the front line, and looking at the particular migrants with qualifications that can ensure they can work in the labour force, they can participate in the labour force, and probably on a one-stop shop for asylum seekers. So then probably I think the recommendations there reinforced a lot of what is already happening and what's important. Health was another area they looked at, and it's interesting, obviously this is post-COVID as well. We've seen how Europe has responded in terms of health care and well, it's certainly in the public health area, and probably I would say one more of that, and actually to include health and healthcare among the shared competences between the EU and the member states, and if that necessary, to amend Article 4 of the treaty. So as we all know, health is a matter for the member states, and we hear it constantly, but maybe the time has come we can do more in the area of health. And I think the outcomes from our citizens panel here will certainly embolden member states to move in that area. I think it's important, certainly where we can it'll benefit smaller countries as well. And myself, I'm sitting on the panel EU in the World, and one of the strong recommendations there is that qualified majority voting for common foreign policy and security decisions would be taken, CFSP, that they would be taken by qualified majority voting, not unanimity. So a lot of frustration with the citizens and the fact that Europe is not speaking one voice in this area. And trade agreements, they want to see a strong ethical dimension to those trade agreements, and that there would be transparency as regards labour conditions where products are being sourced from, or transparency on products, environmental matters as well. So that's probably all in place, well, are due to come with Due Diligence Act. But it's important to have the support and the confidence of the citizens of that and that as well. So European Peace Facility as well. In other areas, joint armed forces for self-defense purposes. Now, this got quite a lot of discussion because obviously many member states are members of Nato. Ireland isn't, Austria isn't, Malta isn't, Sweden and Finland aren't yet. But so I think to recognise that member states have, it's in their constitution, particularly in Ireland, that we are a military neutral country. So that needs to be recognised as well. However, I think the wording will to reflect that, but the strong desire is that Europe would do more to become to defend itself, or and this has come absolutely from the war in Ukraine, and of course more strategic autonomy along supply chains and in the whole area of energy, and to drive energy forward, to have a European somebody in charge of developing renewable energies at European level. In charge is the word that we used. So rather than go, I'm sure there are lots of other areas. Education, really important, focused on young people in particular, and really to foster a European identity. I think we know that the Erasmus program is part of that, very much part of it. That's not available to all. It's not widely known. Considering a voting for young people at 16 years of age, that could mean constitutional change in some countries, but it's something that citizens wanted as well. So there are a range of issues, that will move forward now, as I say, be discussed, move forward for consideration for the final event to come forward. But I would say overall, I think there's lots of very positive elements here, and I really think the fact that we maybe can hopefully get from this an improvement in participation or engagement with citizens in between election would be really, really important. Greater awareness of Europe and where it fits in our lives. I suppose as a practicing politician myself, you depend a lot on media and social media to get your message out. It's never out, and it's the same for every country. Not a great interest there in it until it becomes very relevant and jumps up, and then we can grab the attention. But on the whole, the process it has had some of its critics. One is that maybe the issues are too broad for the citizens, too broad the topics. Like when you look at the economy, jobs and society, very broad topic. Was there enough time given? Probably not, maybe, and to give the citizens more time, more preparation, more support in their preparation might have been an issue as well. When we look at our own citizens' assemblies, we see that they were very limited in time, and limited in topic. It was one question, and that certainly helped focus minds. But all in all, it was a first for Europe. The process is started by Emmanuel Macron, was initiated by him, has come to fruition, and it's important that it'll be finishing now when he's got his second term as president. I think that's quite significant for him. And of course, it's all based in Strasbourg, all the discussions based in Strasbourg in France. So that's been significant. One of the comments that could highlight it, bring the conference more to media attention and broader attention across Europe would be if there was more involvement of leaders such as Macron, New German, and all our leaders in the process, and that would lift its visibility. But I think I've given you just a brush stroke of where it's at, what we're doing with it. As I say, finalising this weekend with a view to launching or to having a statement on the 9th of May, which is Europe Day, quite soon now. So I hope you're still with me, and happy to engage in any discussions or any topics you may want to discuss further.
Thank you very much, Deirdre. Are there any questions here from the room here or out there? Are the questions in writing, perhaps, on coming in? Or? No. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, Norley.
Thanks very much, Deirdre, for that. I'm Norley Kennedy, the Vice President for Research for the University of Limerick. Thank you very much for joining us today, and welcome to our fabulous panel. I suppose I'm very, interested in what you just discussed with us, and I think, the timeliness of your conference is just so important, and obviously there's more experts in the room than me about this topic, but I suppose taking a citizen's perspective, have you a view on, I suppose, the role of universities in how we engage more with citizens on the very important topic of the European Union? And I appreciate that, Joachim has outlined his own role, and Bernadette's and our colleagues, and, the education programmes we offer. But broadening beyond, I suppose, our immediate reach, where do you see, or what are your thoughts on the role of universities in wider citizens' engagement in this really important topic?
Well, thanks for that. Yeah, it's an interesting one, actually, but what you're doing right now is important to feature the European Union. And I see myself in education. And as you say, the courses that you're doing now, European studies for our universities are really important they've educated, or they've brought forward an awareness with young people. And I see so many of them coming through the Parliament now in terms of maybe stagiaire positions and then moving on to get jobs in the Parliament or the Commission. So we hadn't had that before. We didn't have that when we joined European Union first. So, and I think what you say, what another point really is on the whole area of research that's so important for us, that a lot of that funding comes from Europe. We should maybe broadcast that more and say, you know, we're doing lots of research here, but it's because we're members of the European Union that we have the funding, and the ambition is to improve general well-being and lives of our citizens in whatever area that may be. So I think we all need to talk more about our membership of the European Union and what it involves. Well, your primary aim in university is education. And as I say, the courses and the fact that you're so involved in European studies is very beneficial, and I can see it even in Wales, in the community in Limerick and Cork as well, where I live myself.
Yeah, your overview was really very, very useful because it really touched on all the different areas that are of concern to students and are in some way addressed by the conference. And I'm sure some of the issues, the problems, the questions that you raised will be picked up again by the three speakers whom I have asked to perhaps in some way respond to what we've been talking about so far, but also give their own personal perspective on where Europe generally, but also the European Union more specifically, might be headed. The first speaker I mentioned, Bernadette Andreas O'Callaghan, already. Bernadette still has an ad personam Jean Monnet chair, but she is also professor of economics, and her particular interest in that area is Euro-Asian connections, which will no doubt play a major role in the future of the European Union. So I'll hand over to Bernadette now.
Thank you very much, Joachim. Can I stay here? That's fine.
Yes.
Okay, thank you to Deidre, the speaker. You touch on a number of issues. It's a lot of issues, actually. It was I suppose, very difficult to do, and you have a very difficult task. And you started, basically, you talked about the governance structures within the European Union to try to engage, to let the people become more engaged into this process of European integration. And we had our colleagues from political science particularly had a long debate a long time ago about this problem of the democratic deficit. It's true. So if we take the aspirations of the European Union from the beginning, so we say from the 50s, when we started building the what was called the common market, the view was that these governance structures, so whether we take them as institutions, the Commission, and then later on we added the ECB, the European Central Bank, or whether we take institutions in a looser manner, such as the work of North, which is familiar to my colleague here, contracts as the free trade area agreements with Asia, in particular South Korea, Japan. Well, I might come back to those. So the view was that this type of governance, these governance structures would lead to better growth, to more growth in Europe, right? And we have gone through a number of decades, and we did have a growth between us at the beginning, and it was halted with the first shock, which was the oil shock in the early 70s. And each time we have had a shock problem, solutions were proposed in terms of more integration. So now perhaps we need to look at what the performance of all this and see whether the solutions we have proffered have been the right ones. And when I look at the macroeconomic indicators, mesoeconomic indicators, or whatever economic indicators you want to take, what we see is that we have seen Ireland being very much an exception. But I talk about Europe, and you mentioned President Macron, which doesn't epitomize democracy at all, by the way. the most hated politician in France ever, right? You could say, even worse than Napoleon or others. So if we look at the performance in terms of macroeconomic performance, we see substantially high, persistently high unemployment rates, 7.2% for the euro area. We see higher increasing divisions or income distribution, uneven income distribution. Germany, I think, you look at the Gini coefficient, whether you take Gini coefficient, tile coefficient, whatever coefficient you want to see, you will see that the income distribution is more and more diverging, right? And you have a tiny small percentage of super rich and a mass, basically the eradication of the middle class. France, so the old rich countries are becoming poor. Again, Ireland is a bit different. I could say the same about Italy. We see also, which is even worse, the selling up of our industrial strategic areas to foreigners. I mean, to foreigners not being the European Union, right? USA in particular. And again, here I could take the case of France with the nuclear sector. A sector where France had the world capability, world excellence some 15 years ago still, and it's not the case anymore now, right? This is very important for climate sustainability and what is called climate change, because the nuclear energy is the least polluting of all energies, by the way. Right, so the economic performance has been very unimpressive. So there's a problem here. It seems that the democratic deficit is still there. It's not called that anymore. And I just commend you on what you have been doing to try to get the citizens of Europe involved. But what impact is this going to make on policy making, really? You are going to have a meeting in Strasbourg, great. A report, fantastic. And what's going to happen? My colleagues and myself, we have been involved in lots of exercises like this, and we have written commission papers, reports for the European Commission. They just do not listen. They do not want to listen. You know, they have an agenda, and this agenda comes from above them. You have the European Commission, and above that, you have UN, you have WEF, etc., etc. So this is interesting here. On the energy front, it's true that it's an extremely important issue. Some people just realize how important it is in the context of the crisis with Ukraine. Again, here we have the capability to make our industrial system more efficient with the energy, with clean energy, if we were to release all the patents. I think it's 600 or 700 patents we have which are in a drawer and which would allow us to drive cars which are not polluting at all. And I'm not talking about the electrical car which uses the cadmium batteries and so on. The real electrical cars, those that were produced back in 1921. Yes, 1921. It's more than 100 years ago, right? Which are using free energy. So we have these patents. There is a lot of we could do with these suppressed technological innovations. Then I feel myself talking about the future of Europe that Europe is very much in flux at the moment. And I had another Jean Monnet meeting with my colleagues in Germany this morning, and the Asian part was very well represented. Of course, there's China issue, China-Taiwan issue, you combine the two, Russia, and suddenly we see that the Russians are, in a sense, benefiting from the sanctions because they do hold the key in terms of energy, right, vis-à-vis Germany in particular, and vis-à-vis lots of the Central European countries, actually. And now they insist that the exports of the gas and oil be paid in ruble, which is going to change in a fantastic manner the international monetary relations system we have. The dollar is defunct, basically, And there's a big question mark, even bigger than 10 years ago, about the euro. So here we have a region, European Union, which is trying to stick together. And again, mentioning Macron, I don't think is the best example of democracy. By the way, France has been sliding down on the list of democratic countries, right? I think it's close to the 40th position, should be in the top 10, the nation of human rights. But given what has been happening with the Gilets jaunes, right? So the future is, I suppose, one of re-regionalization, is how I see it myself, blocks of countries, and there's a European bloc. Sorry to say, I'm probably going against everyone here, but I can see a strong Europe if and only if we do negotiate, as in try to make peace with Russia. And you mentioned NATO, and I think I quote you, please correct me if I'm wrong, Sweden and Finland are not yet members of NATO. I hope they'll never be members of NATO. This is the problem. It's because Hungary and all these countries have become members of NATO. The limit of NATO has been pushed towards the Russian border, and NATO is not a peacemaking entity anymore. It used to be before the fall of the Berlin Wall, but it's not anymore. So in the present context now, it's better if these countries stay out, and the same with Ireland, actually. So again, I see a very bright future for Europe, right? I'm extremely optimistic. And this involves a better dialogue with Russia in particular. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bernadette. You raised a number of very important questions, which I'm sure we'll be able to return to at the end of the session. So you might take note of your questions, and we'll have a joint session of questions and answers and afterwards. The next speaker is Michael Kelly, my colleague in the Department of, in the School of Modern Languages and Applied Linguistics, and I am delighted that he agreed to come. First of all, that is a nod to the French presidency, of course. France holds the presidency of the European Union at the moment, and Bernadette Ander also obviously is French as well. So that's one aspect, but the other one is that Michael is director of the Rallheim Center for Utopian Studies, which really explores possibilities for the future. What we are talking about here is the future, what the opportunities and the challenges are for the future. So I'm delighted that Michael is able to come and give his perspective on the future of Europe. The last point I would like to make is that it is, of course, important that language scholars are involved in this debate because as you may or may not know, only 1.5% of the EU's population have English as their mother tongue. Everybody else speaks another language, and many of them speak German and French. Michael, I hand over to you.
Thanks, Joachim, and thanks for organising this very timely exchange. What my part in it can be, I'm not entirely sure. I'm speaking from a broadly cultural perspective, and culture is often the kind of repository of all that is formless and, if you like, unrecuperated elsewhere. So in a way, I'm tempted to take a very personal approach to this intervention. I found myself listening to the discussion so far, thinking back over my own introduction to university studies and to life as a student. I was a student as the Berlin Wall was coming down. I was beginning my first year in college, and shortly after graduating with a BA, I spent a summer in Moldova and Ukraine, teaching in the early 90s. I had the privilege of Erasmus experiences and postgraduate study in France and in the UK when that was still part of the EU operation. And overall, what I take from that in this respect is the question of Europe and its framing as somehow a component of our landscape or our lives. And that's, very much the dominant way in which it is framed here, and it is the dominant way in which it is spoken about in political and current affairs discussions, is perhaps to misrecognize the importance of thinking about the indivisibility of the subject and the way in which in all of our lives Europe, or whatever we call Europe, is implicated in all kinds of ways that we are not necessarily even conscious, aware, actively reflective upon. My own experience in that respect leads me to insist on that indivisibility because, for example, as a student of languages in university, the fundamental experience that and a teacher subsequently of the same thing, the fundamental experience that we engage in as students and try to facilitate as teachers is a profoundly, performatively transformative one of the individual subject. And I don't mean that in an ideological or political education way, as very often discourses on Europe and the European Union can appear to be. I mean that in terms of the way in which experiences can change the very structure of a person's apprehension of the world. Language is key to that, multilingualism is key to that, and Europe, in a sense, perceived from a monoglot perspective is a damaged prospect. That's something that I think that our educational systems, and in particular the educational systems of Anglophone countries, have completely, or more or less completely, failed to understand in any kind of depth. But in Europe, in a non-programmatic way, but in an experiential way, is about all kinds of, if you like, things that happen to people under the radar. And one, often when people are challenged, or apologists of the EU in whatever form are challenged to point to progressive, positive developments associated with it, one of the cardinal examples given is Erasmus. And we saw the full, if you like, value of Erasmus when it was removed as a prospect for students in the neighboring island. Just how much, in a sense, you don't know how important something is until you no longer have access to it. But for me, and I was one of the early Erasmus exchange students. I think I was on the first Galway exchange with Poitiers in the early 1990s. So that was an adventure in itself. It was that kind of frontier experience where things hadn't kind of bedded down into, strongly systematized processes, and where the fundamental experience was one of getting to know people in their lived environment and in their language, not as some kind of temporary Anglophone presence who was adding a line to their CV. Now, the point I want to make here is that perhaps the most interesting thing for me about Erasmus is a statistic that I've seen a number of times, and which this precise detail of which I forget, but the number of marriages which have come out of Erasmus and the number of children which have been born through Erasmus relationships, temporary or permanent, is where I see the real nature of the transformative process of European engagement, kicking in to change the nature of what is going on in our continent. Now, I want to kind of fast forward to the Macron event, the re-election of Macron. I'm not entirely sure I agree he's the most hated politician in French history, But, well, you know, we can agree to disagree on that. It's quite an achievement to be the most hated politician in French history and to be re-elected with 58% of the vote, which would be a landslide in many other countries. But we can park that. I'm not fundamentally in disagreement with you about the nature, the profound nature of the resentment felt against Macron as a person and as a style of political action by the French public. It is absolutely eye-wateringly remarkable, the wall of negativity, much of it justified towards this individual as a subject. Now, what for me is at play there is not specifically or uniquely a political issue. It is about the nature of the way in which people experience themselves as empowered, as agentic, as engaged, as active in the construction of their own lives. Okay, Macron, perhaps more than any other politician in contemporary Europe, and perhaps most of all because he's such a supremely successful individual on a kind of an almost caricatural level, you know, the kind of young Napoleon kind of sweeping through the institutions, etc., the Jupiterian president. What he embodies for most people living their ordinary lives is their own sense of disempowerment and disenfranchisement as they engage in the necessary activities of survival or of self-construction. Okay? Now, for me, that gives an important way into thinking about what it means to be European today. We can either see it as a kind of something experienced from the outside, something over there, something that people in Brussels may or may not let us have a part to play in, or we can recognize it for something that is actually quite a lot more generalized in our lives than anything that we can care to pin the European term onto. The title of a book by the left philosopher Alain Badiou on Sarkozy when his presidency began, de quoi Sarkozy est-il le nom, comes to mind. I'd ask the same question, you know, and he proceeds to diagnose that it's not about the individual, it's about a whole complex set of realities that the individual had come to crystallize. Similarly, one could ask that about Macron, or one could ask it about Europe. Because in a sense, it seems to me that once we take Europe as an object in the way we are doing here, necessarily and importantly, we're missing a fundamental point about what, for example, is deeply threatening about Europe to a tyrant like Vladimir Putin, which is that it allows individuals to experience the transformability of their own subjectivity. It allows people to break out of embedded oppressive nation-based narratives. It allows people to construct their own lives in ways that they may not have foreseen from the times of their childhood or the environments in which they grew up in. In other words, it is a very fragile and very complicated proposition to everybody who may potentially be involved in it, that something other than your preordained destiny is at play in your own life. And that is what is deeply threatening about Europe as an imperfect but open proposition to all kinds of populists, authoritarians, tyrants, and why it has been interpolated in the events since the 24th of February. It has been interpolated very much as that project in which identities are not absolutely preordained and fixed. That is what is at stake, it seems to me, in any serious project of European education. It's not about political indoctrination. These are the institutions. This is the way to have a career. Here's how to be the kind of shiny subject that Macron is the kind of caricatural embodiment of. It's about, in a sense, really inviting people to take advantage of the opportunities that are there to change themselves in ways they may not have experienced, to meet people they may not otherwise have met, to live transversal kinds of lives and exchanges. And I don't mean that in a kind of a go off for a year and have a bit of fun kind of way, but very much in terms of things being open, things not being preordained, and things, in a sense, being a little bit more complex than the kind of narratives that we typically place upon ourselves. Fundamentally for me, and I realize I'm going on a little bit, but fundamentally for me here, what is at stake is the fiction of the nation as the kind of horizon of human community. Okay, that we often talk about Europe as a kind of an improbable fiction, or a kind of a scaffolding which is on the verge of falling down. I'm not an apologist for it as a political project, but what I am saying is that there's a profound misdiagnosis in our cultures, and it's shored up by the way in which we study languages, for example, you know, French, German, Spanish, etc. We're back into the nation paradigm as the kind of theatre of human experience. That is a profound misrecognition of the way in which our lives are actually shored up. We all live, whether we like it or not, interdependent, transnational existences. The systems which keep our form of life possible are profoundly international systems, and I don't just mean the economy. And of course there's the ecological horizon as well, which is one of these kind of angelic words that's often trotted out when some kind of meaning is being sought for Europe. People constantly evoke the ecological horizon, and yet somehow they never really seem to vote for it when the chips are down. Europe, in that sense, as a political and technocratic project, probably has some, if you like, role to play, or very clearly has some role to play in being the adult in the room that pushes these issues forward. A similar kind of thing could be said about the regulation of digital systems and markets, and the recent developments in Europe are very important in that regard. What do we make of a world where the most important forum for political exchange is about to be owned by the richest man in the world? It seems to me that the European Union currently is the only entity that's in a position to stand up to that kind of, if you like, recipe for disaster, or at least to modify some of its most extreme manifestations. But fundamentally, from my own perspective, which is organic, and cultural and experience-based, it seems to me that Europe has a lot to offer, but that there is no prescribed way of talking about that, and it is really as much as a sense of possibility and potential as a particular structure or a particular institutional narrative that people need to experience it. And I don't just mean within the privileged walls of the university or the kind of high achievement narrative. It's something that perhaps or hopefully could be open to many more people on a lived basis.
Thank you very much, Michael. Once again, a number of topics that we will raise again at the end of the session, no doubt. The last member of the panel is Jan Plumper, our professor of history here, and I'm particularly delighted that he was able to come, because he would normally be in London, and he agreed to come here in person, which is very much appreciated. But the other reason why I'm really delighted to have Jan here is that, of course, we cannot talk about the future without looking into the past, how we got here, and the past can offer many insights, of course, that are vital for constructing a future. There's a danger as well that in terms of historical perspectives, that and there is a history here in Ireland as well, that the European Union is seen as by historians as part of political history, as part of diplomatic history, perhaps, and that is all important. But Jan takes a different perspective on Europe. His particular work is on emotions and sensory history. So the less tangible and less factual elements of history, the question of mentalities, and some of the issues that Michael raised come into his research as well. So I'll hand over to Jan now.
Thank you very much. we're doing this ad hoc, right? So we're riffing, as it were, off each other's points. And I also want to pick up on a couple of points that were raised by the MEP and by my colleagues, by Bernadette and Michael. The first is the issue of the democratic deficit. And that's good and fine that that was noted in the Conference on the Future. The question always becomes, what do you do about it? And you will then quickly see that it boils down to the old question of those who want to have the supranational entity of the EU to have more decision-making power, and those who want the nation-state to have more decision-making power. And that's usually where you enter a kind of deadlock. Now, February 24th is important, and it's good that it was mentioned first by Deirdre, the MEP, because had there not been a Vladimir Putin, the EU should have invented him. Nothing is better for the integrationists than othering, than a common enemy. That's the greatest thing for unity. Since this situation is probably not going to change very soon, meaning that the war will probably be with us for quite a while, and since this Russian president will probably be in power for the foreseeable future, it is likely that the integrationists will gain more power over in the immediate future. Now, another issue that I wanted to home in is the question of the media, and you alluded to it, Michael, and you, Deirdre, did as well, the social media especially. Social media are often seen as a kind of force of nature that are unchangeable. If there's any adult in the room, as you said, Michael, it is the EU showing that they are not a force of nature. So it's all about reasserting sovereignty. There are countless studies that show that the way in which social media operate is fundamentally incompatible with democracy. The way the algorithms were coded when the people who had to monetize social media were brought in steers people towards what emotion specialists call aversive emotions, hatred, anger, fear, etc. So just to give you an example, if you punch in COVID-19 into the YouTube search engine and you just let it do its dirty work and suggest ever new videos to you, within an hour you will have the most outrageous conspiracy theories on your screen. And it's because of the way the algorithm was coded. Now that's, again, not a force of nature. You can write those algorithms differently. And just like we managed to regulate the usage of asbestos in buildings, of lead in paint, of smoking, etc., we need to regulate this. And that's I think, one of the things that needs to be done. The second thing that needs to be done on that front, speaking here as a citizen more than a specialist, is the protection of public broadcasting. If anybody hasn't noticed it yet, the past 2 decades have shown how precious public broadcasting is, how precious the kind of media are that are subject to some kind of democratic oversight and majorities in a democracy, rather than say whether you're worth 280, $6 billion as Elon Musk is, who just bought Twitter. So there must be ways of protecting public broadcasting much more effectively, and the EU is the most likely entity to be able to do that. And that's sort of the scaffolding that we need, the conditions for the possibility of the survival of democracy in Europe. The third issue I'd like to home in on is the issue of migration. I actually like to take issue with something, Deirdre, that you said. You said that you said that the Conference on the Future of Europe showed that young people, but others as well, want to talk about legal migration. Now, that very dichotomy of legal versus illegal migration is artificial. It's artificial in practice. You cannot legally, as you must well know, you cannot legally seek refuge in a country like Germany, a landlocked country. The only way to get there is with the help of human traffickers. You can only seek refuge in the border states, and even there it's increasingly difficult with Fortress Europe. And by the way, this issue of migration is one where the old left-right divide doesn't work. Many people in your party, in your own party, and in your bloc in the European Parliament really emphasize the Christian in their Christian democratic allegiances. And they're very much more pro-migration. You find laissez-faire economic liberals who also would not make a distinction between illegal and legal migration. And you find some left-wingers who are against open borders because they want to protect the social welfare states for those who have to live most precariously in social welfare states, because they see those threatened by immigrants. So this is an issue where actually history helps. If you go into some temporal depth, you will easily see that it's never been possible to neatly separate illegal from legal migration. You will also see that Europe, of course, has been one of the major continents of outmigrations in the world. And most fundamentally, you will see that being sedentary is historically nothing. It's the bat of an eye. We are fundamentally nomads, if you look at history. And the privileges that come along with a EU passport may well, within very short periods of time, may well become a huge burden. And some of us might be seeking to migrate to other parts of the world. And all of these reasons alone should make us, give us a bit more humility and try to work out more generous and more functioning ways of making it into the EU. The models are all there, the recipes are all there. The only thing that's missing is really political will, and sometimes it's not even the citizens, the voters of Europe. Sometimes it's politicians making predictions of what the citizens may want. Often they're more pro-migration. You have, in a country like Germany, the largest social movement, according to even the most conservative estimates, after 2015, with the so-called Syrian refugee crisis and the influx of about 1 million people from Syria, Afghanistan, and other places, you had about 10 million people engaged in helping refugees. And now with Ukraine, you see a resurgence of that. Even 2 years later in Germany, after the supposed end of the euphoria, you still had people, doing the hard work of helping refugees with their homework, accompanying people to the registry office, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot more goodwill than we think. Final point, and it's again about thinking about a future that's beyond the here and now, if you will, a utopia non-place, to go back to the ancient Greek etymology. Now, I've been reading a book by Mary Serrati that's considered the new gold standard on the question of NATO enlargement. It's called Not 1 Inch. It came out in the States at the end of last year and in Europe at the beginning of this year. And she really shows in minute detail all the missed opportunities of creating, in the early 1990s, a common security architecture beyond NATO, taking seriously Russian attempts to make it into the into NATO or the organizations that would replace it. So there were a lot of mistakes made on all sides. That's sort of the upshot of this book. Now, what I want to end with is that we cannot, I think, we can but work out some kind of vision of how we're going to do this together with that huge Eurasian power, Russia. So we need to work out a vision even during this awful, horrible aggression of Russia against Ukraine, its war against Ukraine. We need to work out some vision of how we're actually going to be together in institutions like the EU and a common security institution. And I'll end with a tiny point, historical fact that very few people know. Did you know that in 2006, actually, Russia and Ukraine started talking about applying for a Euregio or a Euroregio? Those are regions where you get money from certain EU funds in order to clean up a river, cross-border issues, civil society exchange, and they were going to apply for this. They started, these talks became more serious in the autumn of 2010, and in September of 2011, the Rostovska Oblast, so Rostov region, that borders on Donbass and shares the River Don with the two regions in Ukraine, Luhansk Oblast and Donetsk Oblast, so Donetsk region and Luhansk region. They applied for a Euregio. You can even still find on the internet, they got it, and they started cleaning up the river, amongst other things. You can still find on the internet a Russian website for the Euroregio, Euregio Donbass. It's Euregio number 53. And the final thing I want to say is, and we're speaking in Ireland here, if there's ever been a better example than Ireland for the fact that a supranational organization like the EU can go a long way in diffusing border conflicts, think of Northern Ireland, then this is it. And these are the kinds of building blocks. These are the kinds of issues and ideas that need to feed into very serious, very intense thinking about a vision of Europe that includes rather than excludes Russia, which will be sometime in the future, but we need to do this kind of thinking. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan. Once again, really key issues being raised there. I know that some questions have come in, but before I go to them, I would like Deirdre, who's still with us, and I'm delighted to see you, I would like to offer Deirdre perhaps a response to some of the points made.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Most interesting, and a lot of points that I won't respond to them all directly, but I mean, Europe isn't perfect, and it's still evolving. When you look at the financial crisis, COVID crisis, but of course Brexit. I had meant to mention Brexit in my opening statement about Brexit, and that's probably was one of the reasons we have the conference on the future of Europe now. Brexit. Why did it happen? I mean, it wasn't all didn't all come from the UK side. I think Europe has a lot of questions to answer too, is why we didn't reach out more. It's done now, but we've lost one of our from an Irish point of view, English speaking, but a close neighbour with a lot in common with them, but and a major economy as well. So. We don't want that to happen again. We don't want to make those mistakes again. And you can't get away from talking about the future of Europe at the moment without talking about Ukraine and the horrendous war that's going on there, and the brutality, the tyranny. It's dreadful. I know. I agree that someday we will have to talk to Russia, but I think under current circumstances, that can be very difficult. But Ukraine, I would hope, will become a member of the European Union, and there's a strong support for that at the moment. I don't disagree with a lot of what's been said about China and Russia, and Europe. We need to build relationships there as well. On languages and culture, really, really important. I mean, there are two you're talking about our economy, but also language and culture, and the fact that we all have a European passport. I mean, when you think of the confidence or the trust that was built up among the different member states to bring us to that point, I think it's really significant. And of course, we have the values: respect for human rights, dignity, democracy, equality, rule of law. We struggle sometimes with them, but I think they're always there to the fore, those values. And I just on migration, when I mentioned the word legal migration, I deliberately used the word because I was quoting directly from the citizens. They weren't my words. In fact, all the references I made were recommendations from the citizens directly. So I was surprised to see that word there, and it's emphasised on a number of occasions. So I agree entirely. We need to do, we are doing more, and we need to certainly I don't want to use the word burden, but migration and asylum seeking needs to be shared among the member states. And then there are positives, absolutely. When I read about Elon Musk this weekend, his takeover of Twitter, does he know about our Digital Services Act that we're due to finalised in the next month, is due to be rubber stamped completely. There will restrict well, free speech is fine, but not when you affect others. We all live in a society or in communities where we have to respect one another. So, and Europe is standing up to that with our Digital Services Act, General Data Protection, the GDPR, and that's the Brussels effect. Is something that we're having an influence, I believe, worldwide, and I believe in a positive way. So. So there, obviously, we're not going to get all the solutions today, but it's been, from my point of view, very interesting to be involved. Certainly, food for thought. And I'm going to now to prepare. Have a meeting. It was kind of mentioned somewhere there in your discussions, dealing with the file on persistent pollutants and how do we control them, reduce the levels in our environment to protect public health. These are all the day-to-day issues that are going on, I'm sure, in every room in the Parliament where I'm sitting now. So. The show goes on from a legislative point of view, and but I'm very conscious that we need to. I hope that, I use the term democratic deficit, that we can bridge that and put structures in place that we can really empower people more to realise what it means to be part of the European Union. So I think that's my point of view. That's my summary, and I apologise. I have to leave you before the end of your meeting, Joachim, but thank you very much for involving me. Very much appreciated, and wish you well with the rest of it. And thank you to the speakers also.
Deserve a round of applause as well for joining us. Thank you. Thank you. We have, you can obviously stay as long as you can. We have a few questions that have come in.
Yes.
Christine.
So there's a couple of questions just from the online audience, and I know some of them were specifically directed to Deirdre, but I think the panel may have a response themselves on a couple of them. The first one is around the risk of the EU getting weaker, so in light of Brexit, with more countries having governments with leave agendas. So, what can be done, or what is underway that may tackle that? I know Deirdre responded to that herself also, but I'd be interested to get the view of the rest of the panel.
Perhaps you could read out a few more.
Yes, there's another one. Integrity of media is such an important point, and as Michael said earlier, you don't realise how valuable something is until you've lost it. With Ireland has some strong media channels, but they're constantly being eroded. Does the panel have any thoughts on how independent media and public service broadcasting can be strengthened?
Good question.
Jan, you probably spoke most about this particular issue. What are ways
on the practicalities? I don't know how, but they're usually with these issues, there will be specialists in the audience, in the room perhaps, but the recipes are usually out there. Sure, others have ideas how to do it, but it can't be that difficult. Just like it isn't actually that difficult to reassert the sovereign with reference to social media.
Yeah.
It's all about shareholding and control. So who are the main shareholders, and they have the control. And you find that in the case of the States, for example, it's clear you have 6 main shareholders control. So that therefore, yeah, you don't have much room except for the social. You mentioned the social media that you find on YouTube. I'm not sure what you mean by conspiracy theory, but anyways, if you have a mainstream media that repeats ad nauseam the same mantra, right, and then you might have a different perspective which is offered by non-mainstream media, it counterbalances a bit, yeah, but it's the mainstream media are still extremely dominant. It's the case in the EU as well.
I'm not sure I would entirely agree with that. If the algorithms of social media tend to push you towards media content that often falls outside the boundaries of what's actually legally permitted to say, meaning that the citizens' rights are attacked, are violated, anti-Semitic content, etc. So and that was the example of if you punch COVID into the YouTube search engine, that's where you end up with anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. And that need not be the case. That could be different. I think one of the key issues is the loss of forum media. These echo chambers are real. I know we've all heard about them, but they are real. And that the media landscapes that people inhabit nowadays tend to be very fragmented, and which we need to protect or recreate our forum media. We all end up in the same space, and then we can disagree on that content, but we do share some content.
The idea of paying for one's media is probably also an important principle, although problematic in many ways. I mean, it's interesting to see the way that the modifications to arrangements around the license fee in the UK are currently being used as a form of sword of Damocles over the BBC in terms of their relationship with the current government. That said, you know, in many cases we have examples of state TVs or, you know, public TV or media channels that have tipped over into unquestioning support of the particular regime in power. So it's an ongoing balancing act. But again, there's something needing protection, it seems to me, in terms of an open space in which different kinds of points of view can actually be maintained in presence with each other. The echo chamber effect, which is the kind of cardinal resource generator of social media, is having a devastating impact on all kinds of levels, even on the level of mental health, but also, you know, in terms of people's ability to process the complexity of reality in many different jurisdictions. Clearly just letting the market kind of, the invisible hand kind of point us all in the right direction isn't working out.
To me, it seems the question of media is really central for the future, and also for a generation of European identity, because on the one hand you have the national media that we inhabit, on the other hand you have largely US controlled internet, and what is absent is platforms where Europeans consciously communicate with each other. There is the language issue, of course, that doesn't help, but I think much more needs to be done along the lines of the TV channel Arte, which was a great start, but it hasn't really continued. For our debate here, the media one, the media questions are really central. Christine, you might have another view?
Just,
Yeah.
There's a kind of a follow-up on
Yes.
that, really, because, you know, as an educational institution, and we've done lots of, nationally, there's been lots of programs in Ireland around STEM education, right? More mathematicians, we need more scientists. Do we need to think about how we educate future citizens of Europe to be more discerning in how they engage with information? They need to look for truth, and they need to trust sources of information. I suppose, is there a view on how we might look at that from an educational perspective?
Well, it seems to me that that kind of literacy begins with the kind of discussions we have with students when they're writing their course essays about, you know, what is a good source for your work? How do you distinguish something that is of value from something that isn't, in terms of compiling or putting together your own research? But yeah, the new expanded understanding of literacy in a world where even text-based communications like Twitter seem to be in the process of being replaced by image-based formats like Instagram and TikTok. I mean, what does it mean to be a literate, agentic individual in a marketplace of stimuli of that sort? It's also now clearly a mental health issue, and these are not entirely separable.
If I may just add on to that, I'd agree, and I'd say that this is going to be more of an issue. This will be one of our key tests, actually, as we move into an age of deep fakes, where it's going to be technically impossible, unless you have very sophisticated technology, to actually distinguish a fake from something that's not fake. So that kind of literacy, teaching students, giving them the analytical instruments in order to make those distinctions is going to be key. In general, that's the second point on this. I think we just need to reconcile ourselves with the fact that some of the cultural techniques that were practiced for a long time that we are steeped in, such as, say, reading a long novel, we're going to have to teach in ways in which 30 years ago medievalists would have been taught, the study of medieval manuscripts. That is, that you read Anna Karenina from beginning to end, and that there is a kind of pleasure also, a kind of gratification, a delayed gratification, a deep pleasure involved in this. That's something that where the university will, I think, more and more become a space where this is done. And some other techniques will fall into the table because time is limited, and some will just go away, will no longer teach. But that's the difficulty, is that we're at the interstices, we're sort of at a liminal moment where these changes are taking place. We're still steeped in the old culture. The new one has started, but we'll probably have to be very pragmatic and teach students how to read Anna Karenina and get pleasure out of it.
Thanks very much. Yeah, there's a question here in the audience.
Well, thank you very much. Does it work? Yeah, I suppose. There are so many interesting things that came up, but I have two questions. One was more for the MEP, but maybe you have an idea. So I was wondering how this Conference for the Future of Europe reached out to people, like what were the channels they used, and because of course when we talk about demographic deficit, there is, and if we think about the French elections, the democratic dimension was in part limited by the fact that the abstentionism was so high, probably one of the highest rate. So the problem of reaching out to a population that currently is disengaging with political life and political institutions. So I was wondering, what were the strategies used behind this specific event to reach out to this large pool of people? And then the other question is a very broad one and goes back to the war. and to what Bernadette was saying about the fact that the sanctions are not really working and are somehow even profiting the Russian oligarchs. I was wondering, I was wondering, what is the role, in your opinion, of EU in negotiations with Russia? So a very big question. But
Bernadette, would you like to?
So I leave
answer?
the second question to the specialist of Russia. But on the disengagement, okay, I'm a French national, I didn't vote. And many people didn't vote. Why? Because we do not trust these institutions. There is a big problem with the current French institutions epitomized by the president. And of course, if we looked at the detail of the results, you will see that bizarre things have been happening from the first round, actually. So there's a lack of trust. The problem is to rebuild this trust. Clearly, the European Union, as we have today, doesn't work. It didn't produce the expected results, economic results that they had claimed back in the 60s, right? So there's big work ahead. Yeah, of course, we can... I'm born European, to tell the truth, right? My ancestors are from Italy, and I married an Irish man through one of these European colleges, and yeah, I'm totally European, but then let's move on. We need to do something, and to make sure that every citizen, and we are the privileged ones, every citizen can see that the European Union is there at the service of this person, right? It's the problem of which I was rereading Rousseau yesterday. It's very topical. La volonté générale, the general will. The general will should be the objective of our institutions. It's clearly not. They are promoting the particular will, right, which is in total conflict with our general will. And that's what I'm saying, that this has been shown through the French election as of late. He has been elected because there have been something extremely bizarre happening with these elections, but people will find out eventually. So.
Is there another question here in the room? Otherwise, looking at my time, I would like to make a few concluding remarks which pick up on the question that you just asked about the Conference for the Future of Europe. And also on the last point that Christine made about education and the role of education. This is really, you're asking a very important question, and the channels through which this whole process is conducted are in Ireland the European movement, and they tend to communicate with a very selected audience, what should have happened, in my view, is to use educational institutions to bring the discussion into the schools, first of all, so that they can talk to their parents, perhaps, and of course the universities, where we are talking to the younger generation. They should have been key in encouraging the debate. Also, a number of other citizens groupings, rather than following the same old route again, which tend to often reach only a small fraction of the community, and very often just those who are already convinced anyway. You know, the other point, and this is perhaps my final one about education, Christine. This, in my view, is really the key point. What happens in schools is what is going to happen in the future, is what determines the future. The next generation, those who are in school now, they will make the future Europe. And they need to be educated as future citizens. We're doing a lot with our Erasmus programs, but far more, in my view, needs to be done at earlier levels. And if I could make have this final plug to our symposium, which is precisely addressing this very issue. Those out there who are still listening, and maybe the local audience as well, might take down the 10th and 11th of May, where here in UL we're running a symposium on the European dimension in Irish education. And we're going to look at all levels of education, from primary school to how to communicate with senior citizens. So the broad range of education, to me, and I think that the points have been made several times already. There is in discussing the future of Europe, in my view, education is key, but not only universities. Okay, so that brings us to the end. What I personally particularly liked is that this is not a rosy picture here. This was very, very complex, probably brought up more problems than solutions, but what is happening here, and I think all three speakers made that point, is precisely what cannot happen in Russia, and to the same extent. And Europe, if it has achieved anything, it has achieved a much more intense communication between different member states, and in many respects, we are representing this here as well. So while there are huge issues for the future, there have also been huge achievements in the past. So that brings me to the end, and my final thank yous. Deirdre has already left us, but I have thanked her already. I would like to take the opportunity again to thank my three speakers here, and also Christine, who has been hugely helpful in organizing this together with her technical team headed by Richard, and I'm also very grateful to him. So, and lastly, I thank all of you participating here in person, and anybody out there who's still listening to us. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.